Have you ever felt like there's a part of you that you'd rather not see? Today, I do not promise you comfort, but self-knowledge. We will delve into the corners of your mind to understand those hidden aspects that, from the depths, silently influence who you are and how you live. What if I told you that most of your decisions, emotions, and fears do not come from what you see about yourself, but from what you ignore? In the back of your mind, in a dark and forgotten corner, lives a part of you that you have never wanted to face, your shadow. We are taught to look for the positive, to show only our best qualities. But the truth is that ignoring the dark within us only makes it more powerful. Yes, what you refuse to see, what you hide from yourself, is what controls you the most. The shadow is that hidden facet of your being, composed of emotions, desires, and aspects that you once decided to repress. You may not like to admit that you are envious, that you feel anger, or that certain impulses dominate you, but that denial does not make them disappear. On the contrary, it turns them into a force that, from the shadows, defines how you act, how you think, and how you relate. The first step is to recognize that this shadow is not your enemy, but a vital part of you that cries out to be seen and understood. By facing it, you can regain control over those emotions, and instead of allowing them to dominate you, you can learn from them. Integrating the shadow is not easy, but it is the path to a more authentic and free life, where you no longer need to hide aspects of yourself. Imagine living without the burden of what is repressed, without fear of what you carry inside. This is the first step towards a version of you that is not afraid to look at your own reflection. So, are you ready to discover what you've been ignoring inside? When we talk about the shadow, we are referring to a deep and complex part of the human psyche that acts outside of our awareness. It is that part of you that contains desires, emotions, and thoughts that you have repressed, either because you consider them unacceptable or because they do not fit with the image you want to project. The shadow is not something that disappears just because you decide to ignore it. Rather, it hides and becomes a latent force that guides certain aspects of your life from an unconscious place. This concept of the shadow has its roots in the work of psychologists and philosophers who have explored the unconscious. From Carl Jung, who popularized the term in Western psychology, to Jacobo Grinberg, who integrated these ideas in the context of Latin American psychology, the shadow is seen as the hidden side of the personality. It is not something external or alien to you, but rather an aspect of your being that, although relegated to the back of your mind, continues to influence what you do, what you say, and how you feel. The shadow is formed from the moments in which you learn, consciously or unconsciously, to reject certain aspects of yourself. From an early age, we absorb ideas about what is right and wrong in behavior, what is acceptable or undesirable. When we suppress emotions like anger, desire, fear, or even ambition, we are pushing these parts into our shadow. This means that the shadow not only houses the negative, but also potentials, impulses, and instincts that have not found an adequate way to express themselves. Little by little, this accumulation of denied emotions and characteristics becomes an internal presence that acts on its own. By remaining in the unconscious, the shadow acquires an autonomy and a power that consciousness cannot directly control. If you've ever reacted unexpectedly, felt ashamed of yourself, or found yourself projecting criticism onto others, it's likely the shadow at work, manifesting without your permission. Integrating the shadow, therefore, does not mean eliminating it or defeating it. On the contrary, it means recognizing its existence and understanding that it is part of your being. By integrating it, you remove the power it has from the shadows and bring it into the light of consciousness, where you can observe and understand its effects on your life. This integration is what allows repressed emotions and unexplored aspects to find a balance, without the need to dominate or control your actions from the unconscious. In the context of psychology, this integration is seen as a path toward wholeness. The shadow is not only a reservoir of repressed desires or dark impulses, but also a source of potential that, when recognized, can transform and enrich your life. By exploring it, you not only face your fears and flaws, but also a part of you that holds power, creativity, and wisdom, waiting to be heard. It is this process that opens the door to a more authentic life and less dominated by the struggle between what you show and what you hide. The shadow is not something you were taught to face. Rather, you learn to avoid it, to leave it relegated to some forgotten corner of your being. However, what you do not know, and here comes the most disturbing thing, is that everything you denied is still alive, waiting for its moment to manifest. It's not about demonizing yourself or judging those parts you hid. We all have aspects that we prefer not to acknowledge, and often that decision comes from a desire to be accepted, to fit in, or to avoid pain. But let me tell you something. By hiding those parts of yourself, you give them power. You allow them to act secretly and sometimes control you without you realizing it. The formation of this shadow begins from the moment the environment, the family, society, institutions, shows you what is acceptable and what is not. Maybe you once felt anger and were told that being angry is wrong, or perhaps you were repressed for showing sadness, for expressing fear, or for being too ambitious. Thus, these natural impulses, far from disappearing, become layers of a shadow that grows in silence, forming part of you and at the same time separating from your conscious identity. Every experience that leads you to repress an emotion or impulse contributes to this shadow. It's as if little by little you build a box in which you keep everything that you don't want others to see, not even yourself. But this box is not airtight. Over time, it begins to seep in the form of behaviors that you can't always explain, such as disproportionate reactions, feelings of guilt or shame, and sometimes a void that you can't fill. What you put in the shadow does not disappear. It transforms and continues to influence how you see the world and the people around you. Society also plays a crucial role in the formation of this shadow. From an early age, you learn to conform to the norms and expectations of others, to fulfill a role. This can lead you to reject valuable parts of yourself, just because they don't align with what is expected. This social pressure makes the shadow even denser, as you feel like you have to fit into a mold that doesn't always respect who you really are. But that rejected part is still yours, and will look for ways to come to light, sometimes at times you can't control. Imagine what it would be like if you could integrate those hidden fragments, if you gave them space in your life without fear. Think of all the things you could release. The energy, creativity, and drive you've had to repress to sustain a limited version of yourself. Shadow is not just a set of flaws or imperfections. It also holds strength, potential, and aspects of your true nature waiting to be recognized. Accepting these aspects that you have kept is the first step to living a more authentic life. The impact of the shadow on our daily lives is much deeper than we usually imagine. The shadow manifests itself in such subtle ways that you often don't even realize it's there. However, its effects are undeniable, and when you start to closely observe your reactions and patterns, it becomes evident that there is something hidden operating in the background. Think about those moments when you overreact, when a simple comment bothers you much more than it should, or in those situations where you feel envy, anger, or frustration towards someone for no apparent reason. These automatic and visceral responses are signs that your shadow is acting. One of the most common impacts of shadow in everyday life is the process of projection. Without realizing it, you project onto others those aspects of yourself that you have repressed. For example, if you have an ambition or a desire for recognition that you have suppressed, You might resent people who freely express their success or confidence. That feeling does not come from them, but from the part of you that you deny, from that shadow that you reject, and that, however, continues to look for a way to express itself. The shadow also manifests itself in personal and professional relationships. Often, repetitive conflicts with others reflect unacknowledged aspects of yourself. Maybe you judge someone for being controlling, but in reality, you may have a similar need for control within you that you don't accept. These disagreements and tensions are the shadow speaking in a low voice, showing you what you prefer not to see. The impact of the shadow on daily life extends even to your decisions and goals. Sometimes you find yourself sabotaging your own plans, doubting your abilities, or postponing your dreams. That self-criticism or that feeling of not being enough also comes from the shadow. It is the manifestation of parts of you that feel small, insecure, or unworthy, but that you have never wanted to face head-on. Recognizing the shadow and its daily impact opens you to a life with less tension and greater self-understanding. Instead of fighting those emotions and reactions, you can see them as messengers of what is waiting to be accepted in you. The shadow is not only formed at the individual level, there is also a collective shadow that deeply impacts society. This dark and shared side arises from the beliefs, prejudices, and norms that we absorb from the cultural and social environment. The collective shadow is nourished by what a community, a group, or a culture decides to reject or avoid. Anything that does not conform to prevailing values is relegated to this shared shadow, creating a division that affects the way we interact with and perceive others. The influences of the collective shadow are vast. Think about the prejudices and stigmas that exist around topics such as social class, religion, or cultural differences. These judgments are not only born from personal experiences, but are the result of a collective shadow that has been built for generations. From an early age, we absorb beliefs about what is acceptable and what is not, and we often replicate these ideas without questioning them, thus reinforcing the dark aspects of our society. One of the most dangerous effects of the collective shadow is that it can lead to dehumanization and conflict. When certain groups or individuals are seen as the other, a distance arises that allows us to project onto them everything that we do not accept in ourselves as a society. This process can lead to discrimination, racism, and xenophobia, where the collective shadow finds a way to express itself in a destructive way. The collective shadow not only influences relationships between different social groups, it also impacts how each individual views and accepts aspects of their own identity. In societies where competitiveness and perfection are dominant ideals, those who feel vulnerable, insecure, or emotionally fragile may hide these aspects within their personal shadow. In this way, the collective shadow reinforces the individual shadow, creating a network of repression and projection that affects each person at different levels. To confront the collective shadow, it is necessary to become aware of the patterns and beliefs that we maintain without questioning. It is a work of self-criticism and reflection that goes beyond the personal and extends to recognizing the social and cultural structures that perpetuate darkness. Accepting that we are all part of this collective shadow is the first step to freeing ourselves from its effects and creating an environment where diversity and humanity can be expressed without fear. By recognizing the collective shadow, we open space for social change. By illuminating the dark aspects we have avoided, we can transform our relationship with the world and create a more conscious, empathetic, and just society. The consequences of repressing the shadow are dangerous. Denying aspects of your personality, avoiding looking inside yourself, does not make them disappear. On the contrary, they hide in the unconscious and act from there, manifesting themselves in everyday life in ways that sometimes you cannot control. The consequences of repressing the shadow can be profound and dangerous, affecting your emotional well-being and relationships. When you decide to ignore what you consider unacceptable in yourself, that energy does not fade. It becomes accumulated tension that, sooner or later, needs an escape route. One of the most common effects of this repression is personal sabotage. Imagine you have a dream or an important goal, but every time you get closer, something inside you stops you. You begin to doubt your abilities, feel unworthy, or fear that others will judge you. That voice that stops you comes from aspects of your shadow that you have ignored. When you do not integrate these parts, they become invisible obstacles, fears that appear for no apparent reason, limiting you to living a fuller version of yourself. Repressing the shadow can also lead you to project your unaccepted aspects onto others. Perhaps you criticize someone for being ambitious, when in reality it is a desire that you yourself have repressed. Or perhaps you feel aversion toward certain people because you see in them reflected attitudes or emotions that you do not allow yourself to have. This projection generates conflicts and prevents you from seeing people as they really are, since everything you reject in yourself, you are seeing in others. Furthermore, shadow repression has physical and emotional effects. Internal tension, not finding a healthy way of expression, manifests itself in the form of anxiety, depression, exhaustion, or even psychosomatic illnesses. The constant effort to keep these parts in the dark requires an immense amount of energy. Releasing that burden, however, can lead you to a life with less internal conflict and greater peace. The consequences of repressing the shadow affect not only you, but also those around you. When you are not aware of your own limitations and fears, it is easier for conflicts to arise in your relationships, for you to judge without compassion, or to distance yourself from others. In the end, repressing the shadow is depriving yourself of the opportunity to grow and understand yourself fully. Acknowledging it, on the other hand, gives you the possibility of accepting every part of yourself, without the burden of hiding who you are. Accepting the shadow is not an act of weakness, but rather the beginning of a path towards plenitude. Integrating the shadow means opening yourself to understanding and accepting those aspects of yourself that you had rejected. Instead of fighting them or pretending they don't exist, this process invites you to embrace them as legitimate parts of your being. This path to shadow integration requires courage, because it means confronting deep fears and facets of your personality that may be uncomfortable or difficult to accept. The first step in this integration is self-observation. Keeping a journal in which you record your reactions, thoughts, and emotions can help you identify patterns that point toward the shadow. Observe especially those moments when you feel intense emotions, and ask yourself if they are related to aspects of yourself that you have repressed. Writing, in addition to being a tool for self-knowledge, allows hidden emotions and thoughts to find a safe outlet. Shadow integration is also facilitated through dream analysis. In the dream world, the shadow usually manifests itself symbolically, often as figures or situations that reflect desires, fears, or repressed impulses. By exploring the meaning of your dreams and observing the characters and scenarios that appear, you can begin to reveal what your conscious mind has preferred to avoid. This interpretation work opens doors to a deeper understanding of yourself and helps you dialogue with your shadow. Another effective method is the use of meditation and visualization techniques. In a relaxed state, try to visualize those aspects of yourself that you have avoided and notice what emotions or thoughts emerge. The practice of accepting without judgment everything that arises in these moments of introspection allows you to give the shadow space to express itself. It is an exercise in openness and compassion towards yourself, where you recognize that everything that lives in you, even the uncomfortable, has a purpose and a message. Integrating the shadow does not mean letting it control your life, but learning to dialogue with it. By allowing yourself to observe and accept what you have repressed, you free yourself from a great burden. The energy you previously used to keep those parts in darkness is transformed into creativity, strength, and clarity. With each step you take toward accepting your shadow, you become more whole and authentic. The shadow, far from being your enemy, becomes a powerful ally on your path of personal growth. Accepting the shadow is ultimately an act of self-love. It's recognizing that you don't need to be perfect, that every facet of you has value, and that by integrating what you've rejected, you find a fuller, more sincere version of yourself. Although we often think of the shadow as something negative or undesirable, the reality is that within it are aspects of ourselves that can also be a source of strength and growth. The positive aspects of the shadow are not always evident, but they are there, waiting to be discovered and channeled. This hidden potential may include qualities such as creativity, self-confidence, and resilience, which may have been repressed along with other, less acceptable emotions. The shadow harbors, in many cases, talents or abilities that you have learned to minimize. Maybe you were taught to be reserved and not stand out too much, and now hidden within your shadow is a great capacity for leadership or personal expression that you have never fully explored. By integrating these facets, you not only know yourself better, but you can also find inner resources that you were unaware of before. This personal growth that comes from the shadows has a profound impact on how you relate to others. By accepting what you considered flaws, you can develop greater empathy and understanding toward yourself and others. This process leads you to value each part of your being, recognizing that in these dark areas, there are strengths and qualities that enrich your identity. The shadow, when recognized and accepted, becomes a space of possibilities, not an obstacle. Accepting the positive aspects of the shadow is ultimately an opportunity to transform what you have rejected into a source of power. As you integrate these aspects of your shadow, you begin to discover parts of yourself that may seem unknown or unexpected. Perhaps for years you have identified yourself as a shy and reserved person, but in your shadow there may live a part of you that wants to express itself freely and safely. By confronting this repressed side, you realize that you don't need to limit yourself to a fixed image of who you are. You have the freedom to explore and embrace these hidden facets, thus allowing yourself deeper and more enriching personal development. The process of discovering your authentic identity through the shadow is not linear or immediate. It involves a constant dialogue with yourself, an openness to questioning who you are and what values are really important to you. Grinberg's teachings invite us to see the shadow as a map to self-knowledge, where each rejected aspect has something to say about your deepest desires and fears. By facing this shadow, you not only find the missing pieces of your identity, but you also give yourself permission to live from greater authenticity and wholeness. This path to an authentic identity requires courage, as it means questioning long-held beliefs and confronting the fear of not being accepted. However, the reward is a life in which you are no longer constantly adapting to external expectations. By integrating the shadow, you stop living according to a limited image of who you should be and give yourself the opportunity to discover who you really are. This process is liberating because it allows you to live from a place of sincerity and connection with your true self. The shadow, then, is not an enemy or an obstacle on the path of personal growth. It is a door to a more complete understanding of yourself. By accepting both your strengths and your weaknesses, your lights and your shadows, you discover that authenticity lies not in being perfect, but in being fully human. Authentic identity is not found in a constructed image, but in the integration of every aspect of your being, including those you previously preferred to ignore. True strength comes from acceptance, and by making peace with your shadow, You give yourself the opportunity to live a full life in harmony with yourself. Confronting the shadow is a profound challenge, but the result is liberating. By recognizing those hidden parts and embracing them, you begin the journey towards your most authentic and complete version. This process of integrating the shadow offers you the opportunity to leave behind the burden of pretending to be only what is socially accepted. You free yourself from other people's expectations and, above all, from your own internal judgments. By becoming who you fear to be, you accept the totality of your being, an acceptance that seeks not perfection, but truth. When you decide to face the shadow, you are taking a step towards emotional and mental freedom. That acceptance does not mean that you should let your impulses or fears dominate you, but that you now have the power to understand and redirect those energies. What once seemed like a burden or a flaw becomes a source of wisdom, resilience, and growth. From this recognition, you can build a life aligned with your deepest values and desires, not what others expect of you. The final invitation is this: don't be afraid to look inside yourself, even though some parts may seem dark or unknown. The shadow is not your enemy, but a teacher who shows you what you need to be authentic. Embracing every facet of yourself is the most genuine act of self-love and the first step toward a fulfilled existence. By becoming who you fear to be, you discover that you are actually becoming who you really are.